the invasive plants. What is an invasive plant? I say to myself, what are they and where are they? Because you don't see them around in our communities. You have to go out somewhere like this where you'll see them, such as the ivy and the bloom and the other flowers. So I start learning about them. And how do we put that message out into the communities when I look into my community? I think I only know of two others, elders in the community that do work with medicines, and they're unable to go into the forest anymore. So one has her son that goes into the forest to do the medicine, and the other elder said, well, let me know. I want you to go look for this tree and tell me if there's any obstacles along the way. And there's obstacles, take a photo of where you're going so I'll know if I can walk there now. Elders can't walk like they used to when they were younger, learning about the medicines, and even that I found, okay. And then when I heard this coming up, this invasive species coming up, what is an invasive species? Doing recipes and making salves, the easy medicines you can work with. But then I said, now I need to put this other chapter in invasive species and how we, as caretakers of the land, need to be echoing it over and over again and mentoring the younger people about how to go in and look around, such as if we had young people here learning from us, okay, this is an invasive one, but you can take this now, but some of the plants you can't take. You'll have to wait for a certain period. Like the bloom, it's got to have the flowers to be able to take it out, but there are other species that you can't go and cut.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's really interesting that knowledge, that passing down of knowledge, is such a crucial part of understanding, what is invasive, what isn't, and how can we use it as medicine or not. And I think it ties really into, Nancy, you wrote a paper that I got the chance to read called New Plants, New Knowledge, Early Introduction of Exotic Plants to Indigenous Territories in Northwestern North America. And in this paper, you chronicled the ways in which Indigenous people incorporated new species into their lexicons and lifeways. And so in a way, I thought of that as the way Indigenous people have always intervened. They've learned with what's in front of them and transformed it into something. And so I wanted to know, Nancy, if you could talk a little bit about, from the ethnobotanist perspective, related to what Geraldine just said, about invasive species and how people have intervened.
Oh, that's a great question, Mayita. And it's a complicated one, as you can imagine. Because many of the species that people got to know from the European newcomers, they brought in for the purpose of cultivating them. So the apples or garden plants, rhubarb, for example. And these were readily adopted by First Peoples in their communities, and they planted them out, and they often would name them after whatever wild counterpart there was. So, for example, the western dock in Haida Gwaii is tlakos, and rhubarb is called Had's tlakoja in Haida rhubarb.
Oh,
so it's or at least the dock is called Had's tlakoja now, and rhubarb is called tlakos. So they kind of shifted the name according to what was more immediate and of interest. And the same with apples or other plants that people learn to use and enjoy, even things like coffee and sugar and articles that were brought by the newcomers. The tobacco, although there was a native tobacco, but when the tobacco was brought by the Europeans from originally from Eastern North America, brought around. People started using chewing tobacco, and then they started to use it for medicine as well. And so gradually over time, often with intermarriage, sometimes you would have a newcomer married to an Indigenous woman, and they would learn from each other, and she would learn to use the things that he liked, and that kind of thing. So it's a very complicated story about the value, how new plants are valued.
Right.
And I see it right here where we are. I thought as soon as I heard Mayita and Mina what they wanted to talk about, I immediately thought of a conundrum that we faced here at Wildwood. A couple years ago, we recognized that there's a yellow iris down here that's just taken over. It's just spread, and originally it was brought as a garden plant by someone up the lake, and it being an aquatic, semi-aquatic plant, it spread and it took root down here, and it's just taken off. And we thought we should get rid of that yellow iris. I know that yellow iris is Asian in its origin, and it was introduced into Prince Rupert by Japanese people. And my friends, the Gitcat Nation at Hartley Bay, have it growing in the village there at Hartley Bay. So I knew that there's some connection there, and people really love the flowers. They're beautiful yellow flowers. And so there's kind of a mixture of what to do. But we thought, okay, we're going to try and remove the yellow iris from here and get the native cattail and the other native wetland plants growing back in there again, because the yellow iris replaced it. Well, we went down there with a group and we started pulling out the rhizomes and pulling out the iris. And I recognized there are little green tree frogs all over the iris. If we started to pull the iris out, we would be hurting the little frogs, which are a native species, which we love dearly, and they have a lovely song. So we just stopped then. We didn't know what to do. We might try to do a little bit at a time, but we didn't want to hurt the little tree frogs any further. And that's kind of the conundrum.
And as we were pulling them, we had to be really mindful of not killing off the native plants. But I think having both of you is really perfect because you are sharing the knowledge. Nancy is working on helping to document and name the plants so that we become educated about what to do and what to preserve. Protecting the native species. Why is that important?
Because some of the native species, they need protection, they need to be nurtured, like the wild ginger. If you were to go out and find someone had clear cut that space where they were living, they're gone. They could never be reproduced in that area. So that is why we need to start looking at some of the plants that are at risk, I call it, and to ensure that there's no harm going to be coming to them in those areas. And how do you nurture? Everybody talks about camas. Camas, you gotta protect the camas. Gotta look after the camas. Well, do it.
Right.
Well, do you know how to care for the camas? Well, just making sure everything's. No. How do you take care of the camas? You've got to cultivate it so it's going to be coming back. So now you go in a camas field and they're small, they're tiny. So that means the bulb is tiny. Where the old people, when they were harvesting the camas, cultivating it and everything, if that means they were going to grow bigger and bigger. So that's one of the things you need to, we need to ensure. Yeah. If we're going to be aware of what plants need to be nurtured and cared for, you need to also understand why.
Right.
You want to protect it. Can you give me an answer?
Probably not a good enough one. I need to learn more.
So that's what we talk about. And,
well, and I think that's why it's so important that you're writing this book, Medicine Bundles, because if we learn the value of these plants that can also be used for healing, then we'll take better care of them. And so I just wanted to ask you, in the book that you're writing, is there, if you could share just a particular plant that has been used in your medicine bundles?
One of the plants that we were so fond of is the devil's club, because we use it all the time, and the stinging nettle, and the plantain, the different plantains out there, the snowberries. You know, you can see the snowberries alongside the roads, but how do you take care of it?
Right.
So they're not getting swallowed up by the invasive species.
Right.
So yeah, some of those plants I talk about and how we use it and care for it. You know, like was you talking to you earlier about when you pick the devil's club, you know, you ensure that you're not taking everything.
Right.
You know, it's important.
You replant part of it.
Yeah, and how they harvest plants and that, and how they would keep this, do the fire, the controlled fire to clear the land where all the camas was, and this is right near the Gary Oak. And so it's important that the controlled fire is, and I don't see that happening anymore.
Fire was banned by the government in the early 1900s. And many of my First Nations teachers remembered back when that happened, and everything changed. The berries aren't as productive anymore, and all of the plants that were maintained by this creating a mosaic of different successional stages for plants, all that stopped when they banned fire. And now we have even-age forests and we have catastrophic fires. Whereas before, people knew when to burn, how to burn, and they were very careful about what they did. And burning off the camas meadow was part of that. It was knowledge keepers, knowledgeable people who did that. And just as you mentioned the camas and how important it was, and Stasia's talking about tending it. I belong to a group, the camas group, and I saw a photo this last week of a camas prairie in Idaho, Nez Perce land, that had been cultivated over 10,000 years steadily and had been harvested over all that time. And the camas is as plentiful now as it ever was in the past because of the way they selectively harvest the bigger bulbs. They tend, they cultivate the soil, they add fertilizer, and then the little bulbs in the top grow down and get bigger, and then in a few years' time you can come back and do another harvest. And that's a sustainable way of using those.
Yeah. And so how do we approach this? What are ways, we understand, we have a slight understanding of the invasive species, we're learning more about them, we're learning to identify them. We have these ecosystems. What are ways to move forward? Like, what are things that we can do?
I think one thing I would say is we need to look after those plants that are impacted by invasive species. Yes, we need to keep and control the invasive species, but there's certain plants like the wild ginger, like the camas, that are so important. We need to really look after them and focus on them. How do we keep them going? How do we promote them and spread them?
Yeah.
And nature is very resilient. All it takes is one little seed, a miraculous microchip, I call it, that unlike our microchips with computers, a seed a miraculous microchip, has the capacity to multiply out itself, to grow and to create many, many more seeds that can then spread. So all you need is a few seeds and you can make a big difference. You can look after those plants and you can multiply them.
I just want to mention that Nina and Riley's one of the art installations in Clary Dam was this beautiful sculpture that had paper mache teeth that had seeds contained within them of native plants. And so if you pulled the ivy, then you got to take a tooth home and plant it. And I just thought, isn't that such a beautiful?
Right.
Did you see?
I remember that.
That's such a beautiful. That's such a beautiful way to a creative way to think about how we can engage people in learning about these native plants. So I think that's a beautiful tie-in.
Red elderberry, a special form of red elderberry that had yellow berries, like a variant, very rare one. And she heard that there was one growing around Prince Rupert, and she said someone should go up there and adopt a root of it and bring it back to Hartley Bay. And that's where the title for our paper came from, Adopting a Root, because that's what people did routinely. If a stinging nettle was particularly robust and, would make really good fishing line, people would adopt a root and take it, and that's why you see around the village sites all up and down the coast, you see patches of stinging nettle, and you see devil's club, and you see the berry bushes, the gooseberries and the huckleberries and the blueberries, all in the village sites, because people adopted the roots for them or planted. Another practice was to take a handful of berries when you're out berry picking. You fill your basket, but you take a handful and throw them behind you. And that's scattering the berries like the bears do. Right. And that's a way of keeping them living, keeping it going.
See so many people here. I mean, really, we could spend all day here. I guess I'm struck by how little I know about all of these native species and how I'm filled with admiration for people who are making this a priority in spreading the word, in doing the work, in getting down and actually doing the what did you call it, polling party?
The polling party, yeah.
So I'm just impressed with this whole area, and I want to thank you for putting all of that work, but all of the passion into it as well. And as long as I'm speaking, you'll probably realize there's a huge Gabriola contingent here. And I'm thinking it would be lovely if you guys could do this on our little Gabriola Island as well.
We will do this on Gabriola for sure. We're in. But I do want to thank. I really want to honor and thank Nina and Riley from Art Action Earwig, because truly this would not have happened without this amazing human.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for everyone for being here. I brought a little gift for three of you.
She brought us some tea.
I know those from the sculpture we hosted, Native Plants Meet Moms, and many of them are gone. There were camas and stinging nettles. I wish I brought them, but you can choose from them. I'll go. Those are Oregon grape, which is like a really strong plant that's coloring them.
Yes,
Nodding.
thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Cool.
This is beautiful.
So great.
So these are the teeth that Nina created. But thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.